First things first, look at how uninspired this background is. Look at how dull the lighting is. But this is a stylistic choice of this channel, because this channel is all about substance over style. It's not like this is the only place in my house where I can shoot these videos. Today we're going to be talking about cognitive defects and political leanings, and if there's a correlation between some cognitive defects and some political leanings. So this is kind of a charged topic in some ways, but we're just going to be presenting some findings, some research that not usually talked about. Other political commentators don't seem to want to breach these topics yet. Maybe because the research is too fresh, or I don't know. In any case, it's interesting. I think it merits at least a look at. So historically, in the appropriate behavioral science journals, two hypotheses have been proposed. One is called the rigidity of the right hypothesis, that suggested that individuals on the political right are characterized by heightened cognitive and perceptual rigidity. The second, labeled the ideological extremity hypothesis, posited that rigidity was in fact associated with ideological extremism on both the political right and the political left. So, spicy stuff. Now, in the literature, they noticed that the two hypotheses are not actually mutually exclusive. So it could be possible that there is rigidity on the left, but it's simply less common than rigidity on the right. So in a sense, the two hypotheses could both hold true at the same time. Another thing to notice is that most of the research has been dedicated to the rigidity of the right hypothesis. There is this because in academia we tend to have a left-leaning slant. We're not going to be answering this question, and I'm not implying that this could be the case. I was just wondering this out loud, and I'm probably going to cut it from the video. So at this point you should all be screaming, what the fuck is cognitive rigidity? Because if we don't know what cognitive rigidity is, how can we measure it to then check if it correlates with political leanings? So let's take a look. The neuropsychological literature presently defines cognitive rigidity as the inability to adapt to novel or changing environments and the difficulty to switch between modes of thinking. Now, another definition of cognitive rigidity that stresses really the negative aspect of being cognitively rigid is a tendency of an individual to not change even when his choices become maladaptive. So how do we measure cognitive rigidity? We know how to measure political leanings through just giving you a questionnaire, so asking you what your political leanings are. But what about cognitive rigidity? Well, there's a very good recent paper that actually measures cognitive rigidity through 3 tests. And the 3 tests they do are actually quite funny. The rat test, the test to understand if a participant is a snitch. No, the remote associate test, the rat test, is a test to measure cognitive rigidity. It consists of 15 compound remote associate problems in which participants are presented with 3 cue words, cottage, Swiss and cake, and must generate the compound word solution that connects these 3 words. So in the case of cottage, Swiss and cake, the solution would be cheese. Now, the first time I read this, cottage Swiss, I was thinking about Switzerland for some reason. So maybe I'm cognitively rigid. So another more involved way of measuring cognitive rigidity is the Wisconsin card sorting test.
The Wisconsin card sorting test is a classic psychology experiment where the participants' abstract reasoning and executive functions are challenged. While the experiment is running, the participant does not know explicitly what the categorization rule is and has to use the feedback response to guess. After a few trials, the rule changes again without warning, and the participant has to start the abstract reasoning process from the beginning. Now, the last test that they're going to use to measure cognitive rigidity in this paper is the alternative uses test. In the alternative uses test, the participants are asked to generate as many possible uses for 2 common household items. So, for example, if somebody says like, how many ways can you use a spoon? They can say, I can use a spoon to eat yogurt. I can use a spoon to not make like some pieces of paper fly away because there's a gust of wind.
a gust of wind, so I can place the spoon on the pieces of paper. So these would be two uses of a common household item. And of course, you should be able to generate as many as you possibly can to do good in this test. So what are the results of this study? Well, the results are that independents basically blow everybody out of the water. They divided the political orientations in Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And independents performed significantly better on the Wisconsin card sorting test than Democrats and Republicans. They did the same on the rat test. So they performed better than both Democrats and Republicans on the rat test. And instead on the alternative users test, Democrats and independents performed better than Republicans. Now, in this lovely paper we've been following, they also want to use the data in other ways. So what they do is they fit the data with a simple regression model and then with a quadratic regression model. If the data fits the quadratic regression model better than the linear model, and we see an inverted U shape to the data, then that would suggest if on this axis we have cognitive rigidity, and on this other axis we have political leanings, and we have an inverted U shape, then that would suggest that the extremity hypothesis does indeed hold some water. And this is exactly what we find. So what we find is that, for instance, in the case of the rat test, the data are more than 2,000 times more likely to have occurred under a quadratic model than a linear model. To top it all off, they also perform a double linear regression model. And as you can see, this double linear regression model fits the data in a way that it seems apparent that people who are on the extremes are more cognitively rigid than people who are not on the extremes. Now let me read to you a part of the ending of this study. These findings constitute the first direct objective testing of the ideological extremity hypothesis, using behavioral assessments of cognitive flexibility rather than self-reported questionnaires. So this study positions itself as a landmark study, in my opinion. And it's a fresh study. It's kind of new. So we'll see if it gets replicated and if these findings get confirmed in the future. Lovely. Now, just a few last things to discuss with you friendly people. The causality link in these studies is unclear. So, is it the cognitive rigidity that causes people to go on the extremes on the right? Or is it the fact that people who are on the right or on the extremes then tend to be cognitively rigid? This causal connection remains to be studied. And yeah, some things already said, so results would benefit from replications. And let me leave you with a rare emotional outburst that we can find in the review paper we've been following at the end, that I found kind of endearing and kind of nice. From a social perspective, acknowledging the essential tension between the rigidity ideology and flexibility tolerance dimensions, as well as the fact that these are constantly in struggle within the individual and across history, should inspire hope. Why hope? Because it is exactly in the plasticity and the malleability of these orientations and the study of their nature that we can imagine and implement positive change to build more tolerant, loving, and creative societies.